Hey guys, today we're going to look at shade ranges in makeup, specifically foundation. I did kind of like a whole bunch of different research on different talking points that we're going to get to. First off, I just want to address a couple of things. First off, yes, I recognize that I am very, very white. This video is not about me, okay? It's just about shade ranges in general that don't cater to a wide amount of people. Specifically the darker end of the spectrum, and a whole bunch of different reasons why that might be. Like sort of myths as to why companies can't do this and why actually that's not true. Just a whole bunch of different points I want to touch on. Also, some of these are facts and some of these are just opinions, and if any of these opinions you disagree with, that's completely fine. You can feel free to leave your opinions down below in a civilized way, and hopefully open up a little bit more of discussion there as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is shelf space. Now, the first thing that I hear a lot of people talk about is that when a company doesn't release a lot of shades, it's because they don't have enough shelf space in a store. So how this works is if a brand is stocked in like a drugstore or Sephora, anything like that, they may not be able to stock all the shades because they have to pay to stock, however many items, be it eyeshadow, lipstick, whatever. And if that store isn't allowing them to stock all the shades, then that's why their shade range is limited. And this is both true and false, in my opinion. You do have to pay for shelf space, as I said. The thing is, if you only have a certain number of shades that you can put on the shelf, you can do one of two things. Number one, you can base that number or the shade range on any given area. So let's say you are in an area where like this shade sells really well, this shade sells really well. Put those particular shades on the shelf, and that way you're utilizing your shelf space really, really well. Companies often don't do this. The reason I say this is because there are areas where the darker shades are needed more than the lighter shades, but they're still only stocking the lighter shades. A good example of this is the NYX Total Control Drop Foundation. A lot of people in areas like Georgia were saying that all of the darker shades were not stocked ever, and they had to guess their shade online, which is not good. There's quite a few different undertones to choose from in that foundation. And guessing your shade is never a good idea. You should have the availability to go into a store and swatch it. And so the fact that areas where they know these shades are needed and they're still not putting them in the store for you is odd. And so the second thing is, if you can't afford to put that many shades on a shelf, you should put all of them online. Not all companies stock all of their shades online. The other day, I noticed on the Sephora website that the new Bobbi Brown foundation, which comes in at least 30 shades, only comes in 9 shades here in Canada. That's very bizarre, right? We have people with darker skin here too. Unless you're Tarte and you think that people are only light in the wintertime. No, that's not true. It's winter. There are people with dark skin all year round. So I'm not sure why that is, and it doesn't seem to be a Sephora thing, and it's certainly not a shelf space thing, because online you don't have to pay for shelf space. It seems to be a Bobbi Brown thing, because if you go on the Bobbi Brown Canada website, there's a couple more shades. There's 12 out of the 30. Why is that? I have no clue. And of course, you have the companies who just plain old don't make the shades, and even online just don't make the shades. So this is kind of an issue where it's like you could do that, but a lot of companies are still choosing not to. Another thing that I hear a lot is that darker foundations cost more money to make than lighter foundations. From what I can gather, this is actually not true. Uh, there are 4 pigments needed to make any foundation. That is white, black, yellow, and red, because you need white to lighten, black to darken, yellow to make it more yellow, and red to make it more pink. And I think the reason that a lot of people think that a darker foundation is more expensive is because if you're working in a lab and you're not experienced with mixing a darker foundation and getting the undertones right, you may end up remixing the formula again and again and again, as opposed to maybe a lighter foundation and you're more experienced with the undertones and therefore you don't have to remix it over and over again. And so through the reformulation process, that may become more costly, but overall it's not more expensive technically. There are a lot of ingredients that are in lighter foundations that don't need to be in darker foundations, such as things like titanium dioxide and other ingredients that may appear ashy on darker skin. Those don't need to be present in darker foundations. And again, getting back to darker pigments themselves not being more expensive, this is very true because a lot of indie companies are actually putting out darker pigmented foundations, like very small indie companies. I'll show you one now. This is Silk Naturals. Look at their shade range here. If they can afford to do this with all of these different shades and undertones, why can't a bigger company with a lot more money? It's obviously not costing them that much. Another thing that companies are trying to tell everybody is that there's no demand for darker foundations. That's not true. There are a lot of different sources out there that have cited the fact that approximately $7.5 billion is spent on cosmetics every year by Black women. That's a lot of money spent on makeup, and why aren't companies getting in on this? Don't you want as much money as possible? So yeah, obviously there is a demand for it. If you look at the launches of brands with like 30 or 40 shades, like Fenty Beauty did last year, they had 40 shades. All of the darkest shades sold out first, which means there is a demand for shades not being made elsewhere. If you make the shades, people will buy them. Every company should launch with 30 to 40 shades. That's what I'm hearing a lot of people say these days. Personally, I don't necessarily agree with that, and I will tell you why. The more shades you want to release, the more expensive it is. I did touch on that a little bit a few minutes ago, but so it'll cost more to formulate the foundation again, like through the original formulation and then like testing it, whatever remixing you have to do, etc. And then you have to pay for said shelf space if you're stocking it in a store. And if you're not, then if you're an online company, that's okay. You don't have to worry about that. And I'm sure there's tons of other fees as well. And for a really large company like Fenty Beauty, that's run, well, not run by Rihanna, but she's the face of it. She has her own funds, and then she's funded by 2 parent companies. You have to consider that when a company launches with that many shades, what kind of financial backing they have, as opposed to a smaller company. So a lot of these smaller companies don't start with the same amount of shades, but build them up over time. They start with a base number of shades, and once they have the right amount of income, they usually quite quickly start putting out more and more and more. I think the most important thing here is to note whether or not a company has a really solid gradient. Now, here's a couple of examples. Here's an example of, let's say, a Tarte-sized shade range, 15 shades here, but note the gradient. You start at light, you go to deep, and you have approximately the same amount of shades in each section. So like fair, light, medium, tan, deep. Tarte didn't do that. It went light, 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 light. Oh crap, we forgot something. Deep, 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 you know? And even there are a few companies who have more than 20 shades, closer to 30, and they do the same thing. They have about 15 to 20 different light foundations, and then at the end they're like, oh no, we forgot something. Quick, add in a few shades. So it's not always the number of shades that matters, it's how evenly dispersed they are. That's what matters. And I think that's actually a good point to make, because I think that's a big reason why people are so mad at Tarte, is because it's very clear that all of their darker shades were an afterthought. Look at how carefully they paid attention to the lighter shades in each undertone. And then the 3 shades at the end are orange. And they really don't suit many people at all. Next, let's talk about international brands. This is a little bit trickier. So let's say you're a brand that lives in a country, that comes out of a country that there's not a lot of diversity there, okay? There actually are some countries in this world where actually less than 1% of the population has darker skin. And let's say you are putting out your foundation only in that country. Coming from a business point of view, I can understand why a shade range would be more limited there than over here. I think that makes a little bit more sense. However, when these brands become more international, they start selling through authorized resellers overseas in more densely populated areas with more diverse skin tones. I think they do have a responsibility to broaden their shade range. And if they don't, that's when it becomes an issue. So, for example, let's take the Dermacol foundation. This doesn't come in that many shades. I believe it's made in the Czech Republic. And I can understand why it would start with that many shades. But it's internationally renowned now. It's done really well in the US. And it is largely used in film and theater. A lot of people in film and theater come in a broader spectrum of shades than this, especially in areas outside of where this makeup was originally made. And now that it is being selling outside there, I think they really need to work on that. So I can definitely understand where the criticism for that comes from. But if you're really only buying and selling to a market that is this size, I don't think it is as realistic to criticize them as much as, say, somebody in the US who is selling all around the world and in the US with such a crappy shade range, you know what I mean? And the last thing I really want to touch on, and this is something that baffles me quite a bit, and I didn't realize this until And the last thing I want to touch on, which is something that really baffles me and was something that really kind of shocked me when I started looking around a bit, which is that companies, or some companies that I have found, are already making darker shades, and chances are you just don't know about it because they're not selling them anywhere near you. I'm talking about brands like Rimmel, widely known for their really poor shade selection. They're selling darker shades in places like South Africa. So they have the means to make those shades for you. They're already making them. They're just not selling them to you. What? That's horrible, isn't it? Yeah, I really don't know how to respond to that. So It really makes you wonder how many other brands are doing this. And yeah, like I was really shocked by this. And so really, to wrap up this video, I really wanted to communicate the fact that through all of this, it's not impossible to make darker shades at all. Smaller companies are already doing it. Larger companies, to some degree, are, but a lot of them still aren't. And so, yeah, I'm not very happy about it. And I hope to see more change because obviously there's a lot that can be done and they're not doing it. So it's 2018 and hopefully a change is coming and I hope to see it soon. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know what you think down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and I'll see you next time. Bye guys.